Welcome to our deep dive into the world of cocaine and methamphetamine. Um,
Yeah.
it looks like you've provided a really interesting mix of sources here.
Yeah.
Some academic papers, historical overviews, even some public health reports. Clearly, you're looking to go beyond the usual headlines and get a more nuanced understanding of these powerful stimulants, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
Yeah, it's fascinating how much these two substances have shaped history, culture, even economics. Looking at the bigger picture can really change how we see the current landscape of stimulant use.
Okay, so let's start with cocaine. I was reading this paper that you flagged about the Spanish conquistadors and coca leaves. Did you know they initially banned the coca plant when they got to South America?
It's true. They saw it as part of pagan rituals and tried to suppress it.
Mm-hmm.
But then they realized the indigenous people were way more productive when they were chewing coca leaves.
Oh, wow.
Talk about a quick turnaround.
Wow.
They started using coca leaves as currency, essentially paying workers with them.
Whoa, that's a wild twist. So it goes from banned substance to a tool of economic control. Talk about a complicated history.
Exactly, and that complexity continues. For example, remember Albert Niemann, the chemist who isolated cocaine in the 19th century?
Right, like the guy who opened Pandora's box?
Exactly. It was initially hailed as a medical marvel, used in everything from toothache drops to Coca-Cola. But as your sources highlight, that initial fascination quickly gave way to concerns about addiction.
And boom, prohibition in the US by 1922. But of course, that doesn't end the story. This one source you included mentioned the emergence of crack cocaine in the 1980s. It's like we can't escape this cycle of fascination, exploitation, prohibition, and the emergence of even more potent forms.
Yeah, it's a pattern that repeats throughout history. The sources you selected really emphasize that.
This is where street names get interesting. Crack, rock, or base for crack cocaine. Those names evoke a certain image, don't they? Hard, potent, almost dangerous. And then you've got coke, snow, or flake for cocaine, which paint a different picture, maybe a little more glamorous.
It's remarkable how language shapes perception. Those street names, seemingly casual, represent substances that directly impact our neurochemistry, specifically the dopamine system.
Right, dopamine. It's like our brain's reward system.
Right.
Every time we experience something pleasurable, dopamine is released, reinforcing that behavior.
Exactly.
Ah.
And cocaine and meth tap directly into that system. They essentially flood the brain with dopamine, creating this artificial sense of euphoria.
Okay, so now let's talk about methamphetamine. Unlike cocaine, which comes from the coca plant, meth is completely synthetic, cooked up in these clandestine labs.
Right. You highlighted an article that delves into the dangers of meth production. The ingredients are alarming. We're talking battery acid, drain cleaner, lantern fuel, even antifreeze. These chemicals pose serious risks not only to those using the drug, but also to anyone involved in its production.
It's scary to think about what goes into making meth. And it's interesting how even the street names, ice, crystal, glass, reflect its often crystalline appearance. Then there's crank and speed, hinting at that intense rush of energy.
That energy rush is a key difference between cocaine and meth. Cocaine's effects typically wear off within an hour or two, but with methamphetamine, you can be high for 8 to 12 hours.
Whoa.
That longer duration highlighted in several of your sources contributes to meth's highly addictive nature.
Wow, I didn't realize that meth could stay in your system for that long. That explains why it's so hard to quit. But isn't it dangerous for your brain to have that much dopamine for that long? Doesn't it mess with your reward system?
That's a crucial point. This prolonged surge of dopamine can actually damage the brain's reward system. Imagine it like this. If you're constantly hitting the reward button, eventually it stops working as well. This can lead to depression, intense cravings, and make it even harder to experience pleasure naturally.
So it's a vicious cycle. You use the drug to feel good, but then it damages your brain's ability to feel good naturally, so you crave more of the drug.
Precisely. And that's why it's crucial to view addiction not as a moral failing, but as a complex interplay of these neurochemical changes and behavioral patterns.
Yeah.
Picking up on that idea of addiction as a disease, it's important to consider the many factors that might contribute to someone experimenting with cocaine or methamphetamine in the first place. Your sources touch on some really interesting points here.
Yeah, you included this article about the portrayal of drugs in pop culture. It's like a mixed message we're constantly getting.
Right.
Right. Public service announcements warning us about the dangers, but then movies and music sometimes make stimulant use seem glamorous or even edgy.
It's true. And for young people especially who are still figuring things out, those conflicting messages can be incredibly confusing.
Yeah.
They might see their favorite musician or actor using drugs and think, well, if they do it, maybe it's not so bad.
And then there's peer pressure, which can be a huge factor, especially in those teenage years. It's that feeling of wanting to fit in, to be part of the group.
Mm,
If your friends are experimenting with drugs, it can be really hard to say no.
absolutely. And for some, drug use might be a way of coping with difficult emotions, stress, anxiety, maybe even depression. They might see stimulants as a quick fix, a way to escape from their problems, if only for a little while.
It's a dangerous coping mechanism, though, because it doesn't address the root of the problem.
Right.
It just masks it and often makes it worse in the long run. You even flagged a study that explored the link between trauma and substance use.
That's a crucial point. Individuals who have experienced trauma, whether it's physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, may be more likely to turn to substances as a way to numb the pain or to cope with the lingering effects of that trauma.
It makes you realize that there's often a deeper story behind someone's struggle with addiction. It's not just about willpower or making the right choices. There are all these underlying factors at play. And speaking of factors, you marked a section in one of the public health reports about the impact of accessibility.
Right? If drugs are easily accessible in a person's environment, at school, in their neighborhood, through social connections, the likelihood of experimentation goes up significantly. It's about reducing risk factors.
So it's not just about telling people don't do drugs. It's about creating environments that make it harder for them to access those drugs in the first place, like community-based prevention programs.
Exactly. And those programs can be really effective when they address the problem from multiple angles. Educating young people about the risks, teaching them healthy coping mechanisms, providing support to families. It's about building resilience from the ground up.
I'm thinking back to what we were discussing earlier about how cocaine and meth affect the brain's reward system. If we understand how these drugs hijack that system, doesn't that knowledge itself become a powerful tool in prevention?
It absolutely does. The more we understand about the neuroscience of addiction, the better equipped we are to develop effective prevention strategies. And the more we can empower individuals with that knowledge, the better choices they can make.
It's like if you understand how the game is rigged, you're less likely to play it.
Right, precisely. But it's not just about individual choices. We also have to address the systemic issues that contribute to drug use. Poverty, lack of access to healthcare, social inequalities. These are all factors that can make someone more vulnerable to addiction.
It's about creating a society where people have the resources and support they need to thrive so they're not turning to drugs in the first place.
And one final point which you highlighted in your sources is the role of genetics.
Oh, right. That some people might be predisposed to addiction based on their genes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Research suggests there's a genetic component to addiction, meaning some individuals may be more susceptible to developing a substance use disorder than others. Again, this doesn't mean destiny, but it underscores the importance of early intervention and prevention efforts, especially for those who might be at higher risk.
So it's really this complex interplay of nature and nurture. Genetics might make someone more vulnerable, but it's the environment and the choices they make that ultimately determine whether they develop an addiction.
That's a great way to put it. It's this dynamic interaction between our biology and our experiences that shapes our relationship with these substances.
It's amazing how much we've uncovered about cocaine and methamphetamine. From their history and effects on the brain to the complex web of factors that contribute to addiction. But now let's shift gears and talk about solutions. You included some promising research on treatment and prevention, and I'm really curious to delve into that.
It's encouraging to see how the field of addiction treatment is constantly evolving. We're moving away from that old one-size-fits-all approach and recognizing that recovery is a very personal journey. What works for one person might not work for another.
Yeah.
Your sources highlight some really exciting advancements, especially in medication-assisted treatment.
Oh, right. I remember reading about that. So are we talking about medications that can actually help people overcome their addiction to cocaine or meth?
Well, it's not quite as simple as a cure, but there are medications that can play a crucial role in managing cravings and withdrawal symptoms, especially in those early stages of recovery, which can be incredibly challenging.
That makes sense. If you can ease those intense cravings, it gives people a fighting chance to focus on therapy and rebuilding their lives without constantly battling those urges. What kinds of medications are showing promise?
One interesting area is the research on repurposing existing medications. For instance, some studies suggest that medications like disulfiram, originally used to treat alcohol addiction, and modafinil, the stimulant used for narcolepsy, might have potential in reducing cocaine cravings and use.
So even though there isn't an FDA-approved medication specifically for cocaine addiction, yet there's hope on the horizon. What about methamphetamine? Are there any medications that are proving effective for that?
You highlighted a study on bupropion, an antidepressant that also seems to help reduce methamphetamine cravings. And then there's naltrexone, which is used to treat both opioid and alcohol addiction. And researchers believe it might block the rewarding effects of meth, making it less appealing to use.
It's incredible how we're learning to leverage existing medications in the fight against addiction. It's like we're finding new weapons in our arsenal. But what about those futuristic-sounding brain stimulation techniques? You mentioned those earlier.
Ah, yes, transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, and transcranial direct current stimulation, TDCS. These are non-invasive techniques that use magnetic or electrical pulses to stimulate specific areas of the brain involved in addiction.
So it's like rewiring the brain's circuitry to break free from those addictive patterns.
You could say that while still in the early stages of research for addiction treatment, these techniques show a lot of promise. And it's fascinating how they offer a completely different approach focusing on the brain's electrical activity.
It's exciting to see all these advancements in treatment. But as we've discussed, prevention is just as important, right? What kinds of strategies are working to stop people from experimenting with these substances in the first place?
You're absolutely right. And prevention works best when it tackles the problem from multiple angles. The individual, the family, the school, even the entire community. It's about creating a safety net of support.
Like those school-based programs that teach kids about the risks of drug use. I remember those from when I was in school. Do those actually work?
Studies show they can be quite effective, especially when they go beyond just lecturing about the dangers. The best programs involve interactive activities, role-playing, open discussions, things that really engage students and help them develop critical thinking skills so they can make informed choices for themselves.
And what about involving families in prevention efforts? It seems like parents would play a crucial role.
They absolutely do. Family-based interventions can be incredibly powerful. These programs teach parents how to communicate effectively with their kids, set clear boundaries, and recognize the warning signs of substance use. It's all about strengthening those family bonds and creating an environment where kids feel comfortable talking about these issues.
So it's not about being overbearing or controlling. It's about fostering open communication and trust.
Exactly. And at the community level, we're seeing successful initiatives like drug-free zone policies, youth outreach programs, public awareness campaigns, and after-school programs that give young people positive alternatives to drug use.
It's like we're building a healthier ecosystem where those temptations and risk factors are minimized and people are supported in making positive choices.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And remember, prevention isn't just about protecting young people. It's also about supporting adults struggling with addiction, providing access to treatment resources, support groups, employment opportunities. It's about fostering a culture of compassion and understanding, recognizing that addiction is a health issue, not a moral failing.
It's been an incredible journey exploring the world of cocaine and methamphetamine. What are your final thoughts as we wrap up this deep dive?
I think the key takeaway is this. Addiction is a complex issue, but it's not insurmountable. With continued research, innovative treatments, and a commitment to prevention, we can make a real difference in the lives of individuals and communities affected by substance use disorders.
I couldn't agree more. And remember, if you or someone you know is struggling with addiction, please reach out for help. There are resources available, and recovery is always possible.
Knowledge is power. Stay informed, stay engaged, and let's keep working together to build a brighter future, free from the grip of addiction.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.